think we can move on to our second part. Sometimes I think that I should just give you guys the entire time to work on questions. I feel like you always get to the good point of discussion and you're getting into it, and then we stop and do the second part. One of these days we'll just have to have a week where you do the thing the whole time. You could come next week and go back and look at some of the old ones. I won't be here, like I sent out in the email last night, just so you're aware to look at dates for the coming few weeks, because sometimes Father Ross is gone, sometimes I'm gone, and so Bible study will be impacted a little bit, and it looks like it seems fitting just to have a little bit of a breather anyway. It's hard to keep up with, so please just pay attention to that I sent out. Today we have to take Paul to Athens. Now, Athens is the capital of Greece. Athens is the capital of Greece. At this time, Athens was, it wasn't a great city in the world in the sense that it was in the ancient times. In fact, Athens even today isn't really on the map as far as like important commercial centers go. Greece has had a bit of a tortured history that's been long, and it's just not the same kind of thing. The soil in Greece isn't great for growing. Much less of the land is arable than like North Dakota, where most of it is used for growing things. In Greece, the soil is rockier. And Athens, outside of, I suppose even in the age of Alexander the Great, Athens wasn't really the center of his empire, because Alexander is from the region of Macedonia, the northern part where Paul has been. So he stopped in, was it Philippi first, and then Thessalonica, and then he went to Berea, and now he's on his way to Athens. But we know of Athens because, while it isn't an important commercial center in the same way, it's an important center of intellectual life, of philosophy, of learning. Athens was famous even in these times of St. Paul for its schools and its teachers, this engagement with philosophy that we talked about a little bit last time. Do you remember our 4 groups of philosophers? The Stoics are one. The Epicureans are another. Plato is a third, and Aristotle. And then I think on the Thursday night group, I talked a little bit about mystery cults. I don't think I talked about mystery cults very much on Tuesday morning. But the mystery cults are sort of hard to put a finger on exactly what they were and how widespread and how popular they were. Mystery cults were sort of like secret societies of the ancient world. They had initiation rites and some of these different things. Some of them are rather weird and esoteric. They form part of the basis of Gnosticism. Anyone know what Gnosticism means? Early Christian history? Gnosticism is about salvation by knowledge. It's from the word gnosis, which is Greek for knowledge. And it's like there's a secret body of knowledge that you learn to achieve salvation. So in Gnostic societies, you always have initiates, like people who are kind of interested on the outside. And then when you go through the initiation rites, you get access to the secret knowledge that brings you salvation. And it gets weird in a hurry. Like they're not... Some of the writings of Jesus, for instance, that were rejected out of the New Testament come from these Gnostic communities, and it's often a place where you get gods and demigods and good gods and bad gods, and They tended toward the soul good, body bad, so it doesn't matter what actions you do with your body because it's what you feel in your soul. So you can basically do as much as you want. You can murder someone with your body because it doesn't affect your soul. Christianity widely rejects that. Like, nope. There are parts of Christianity that feel a little bit Gnostic in one sense, because like the revelation of the Trinity, of God as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, is a piece of knowledge that the New Testament gives us. So there's little tie-ins, but in Christianity it works differently. It's not a secret society where the truth is hidden. In earlier times it was a little bit more, but that had to do with a political situation. Why would things be a little bit more secretive in early Christianity? The persecutions, exactly. So first it began with Jewish people in the synagogues, but very, very quickly it progresses to Roman persecution, sort of authoritative from the empire, from the emperor. And in that kind of scenario, people are much more secretive about what they believe. The same thing happens. Hopefully you've had the chance to read some of the stories about Christianity under communism in Russia and Christianity in China today, and the steps that they go through to sort of communicate who's Christian and who's not, and the use of symbols and different things. Like there was a time in Russia where the Christians somehow all got on the same page that there was a particular dessert that they would make. And so if you invited someone to your house, you would make this dessert. And then there was something like if the people that came as guests put salt on it, it meant that they were Christians too or something. Like there were these secret kind of code things because you didn't know who was safe and who was going to report you to the communists. And when Christianity is illegal, people would go through that kind of step. And so there are times where Christianity feels a little bit more secret society-ish. But it's not because of the nature of Christianity, it was because of the nature of the political situation outside of us. But all of this is a background, and it's important to see that there are these mystery cults, they're secret societies, they're weird. They do things like dump pig's blood on people. That was a cult of Mithras, and there's some other ones. And people, by and large, it had a lot of the attraction in the ancient world that New Age spirituality would today. Like it was esoteric and unique and different, and what you believed mattered, what you knew mattered, unlike the Roman system where belief was just sort of, meh, doesn't really matter, you just do the things. It's a big Roman refrain. You just say the prayers, you offer the sacrifices, you do the services, you can believe whatever you want. Some of the Romans lament that, but it's that had become fairly widespread. Religion in ancient Rome was civil. And so the mystery cults are sort of in the background as well. Some of them seem to sort of mirror Christianity and have these pseudo-sacraments like baptism in pig's blood and all sorts of creepy things. You can look up more on it if you want. But they're part of the religious background. So Paul decides to walk directly into this debate. He decides that the best way through is to make everyone mad at the same time. So he goes to a place called the Areopagus, which is a hill in the middle of the city, where many of the important debates were held. It was the seat of the government in Athens at the time, and it's also called Mars Hill. Sometimes you'll hear of Protestant things that reference Mars Hill. There's a big Mars Hill church founded by Rob Bell, who eventually left it. He wrote some other controversial things, but that's this hill. It's talking about this speech of St. Paul. And so the Athenians are kind of intellectually curious. This is a little bit more akin maybe to the university atmosphere of the modern college, where people are kind of curious. There's these teachers, they teach about different things, and they're like exhibits in a museum. Like you go to look at them and listen to them, and oh, that's kind of neat. Yeah, that's kind of nice. And then you move on to the next exhibit and, the next area of teaching. That seems to be the milieu, or the situation on the ground in Athens. And Paul comes along, and he's not really going to agree with that. Christianity isn't just some new teaching or a science exhibit. Christianity is something that makes a difference. And so they're approaching Paul from this perspective of, well, this guy is like all the other guys. He's just a different school of thought. He has a different teaching, and we can listen to it and debate its merits without really being engaged. So Paul gives a speech. Now this is kind of odd in the text of Acts. Why? What is unique about this? When's the last speech that Paul gave? It's actually chapters and chapters ago. If you remember, at the beginning of Acts, we had several extended speeches, like Peter's speech to the Jewish people after Pentecost, Peter's speech to the Jewish people after the healing of the crippled man. And Paul, I forget where he gives speeches, but he has several of them early on in Acts as well. And then the narrative switches. What does it switch to? I didn't quite hear you. They move around. It kind of goes to a narrative of what they did. They went here, they went there, they got stoned here, they got stoned there, the people didn't like them here, the people didn't like them there, and you have a lot less of Paul speaking. Now all of a sudden, Paul jumps out of the woodwork again, and we have one of his speeches recorded. And so that's a different note. Things like that are good to notice. Like, Paul hasn't talked for a while. I mean, the text has mentioned him preaching in synagogues, that's true, but it didn't say what he said. Or it just kind of contained a bullet point or two of what the issue was or what made the people concerned. And then it moved on to persecution or being thrown out of town. Here we have Paul's speech again. And he comments that the Athenians are religious. One of the things in the ancient world that we have to be careful of is that we sort of think about it like the modern world does, and the ancient world was far more religious than anything modern. Even outside of Christianity, these were religious people. Religion was a huge part of life, probably because it was a center of civic life. People were connected to temples, there were festivals, but there were also all kinds of things that you couldn't control. And praying to these gods was one of the ways of entering into this. If you were a wife with children and your husband was a seafarer in ancient Athens, the sea is a scary place, and storms are big deals, and people died and didn't come home or got attacked by pirates and all kinds of things. There's a god of the sea. Storms and thunder. There's a storm and thunder god. In Greek, it's Zeus. There's, on and on and on and on. You can look at all of these different natural forces and different things. People were quite religious. So there were sort of temples everywhere. It would probably be akin to our feeling when you go to the city of Rome today, and every time you close your eyes for a second, you're bumping into a church. I mean, they're just all over, on every block and every street, and there's big ones and little ones and, nice ones and ones that are kind of falling apart. Ancient Athens was probably more like that there were these temples everywhere. So Paul sees lots of shrines to idols. And he doesn't talk so much about the gods at the very beginning. There's a lot of mix of superstition in with deities in paganism. And this happens even to people today. There's people that are superstitious about all kinds of things. You know, black cats walking under ladders and mirrors shattering and who knows all of the other things. Christianity would say that that kind of stuff is hogwash. Again, it's sort of a control outside of, or seeking control outside of God and looking for answers to the future in fate. Well, like, my life is bad because I broke a mirror 7 years ago. From the outside, you might say, no, your life is bad because you're addicted to alcohol. You know, and some things just happen. They're not always our fault, and, you know, there are coincidences, but coincidence doesn't mean correlation. Like, just because it happened at the same time doesn't mean that it goes together. You know, if you started feeling sick on a day where it was sunny, you might conclude that the sun made you sick. You would conclude in error that the sun made you sick. It doesn't do that. But people do this kind of thing all the time. They have their lucky gym shorts, and I think it's important to wrestle with that kind of thing in our heart too. That we want to be careful of putting or placing authority in things outside of God. And I say that not as something to shame people or condemn people. Like, we discover stuff about ourselves all the time. Like, oh yeah, I did kind of. You know, that sense, like, I woke up on the wrong side of the bed this morning and the whole day is going to be bad. That's more of a mental attitude, but you could also say, well, the whole day doesn't have to be bad. I'm still redeemed by God. My sins can still be forgiven. I can go to Mass. Those are pretty good things, even if everything else in the day isn't so good. So Paul is walking along, and he's kind of dealing with people that are superstitious and religious, and so he takes this tack that's kind of strange. I see an altar to an unknown God. There's lots of altars, and this one is to gods that we don't even know about. I wonder how you worship gods that you don't know about, but that's me in the modern world. And Paul says, so I proclaim this unknown God to you. Like, this feels a bit rhetorical. Like, he's trying to build commonality with his audience. You have lots of gods, you're very religious, and so you have this unknown God. Well, I'm going to tell you about this unknown God. What you worshipped already. He seems to be trying to build a bridge for them, and he goes to God as creator. That God is the creator of the heavens and the earth. He's not one being among lots of others. There's not lots of gods. They don't behave like immoral humans. There's one God, a God who created everything. And he does not dwell in places made by human hands. That God is not in an idol. That God is a spirit. And he's, like, that makes more sense if you think about it in the context of Greek idolatry. That they're worshiping these statues, they're worshiping these things as kind of representations of gods, and I'm not exactly sure how it works in their minds. But God is not in need of anything. He doesn't need anything from us. And this is a bit of a commentary on Greek society. So the ways that Greek religion was built is that gods are immortal, but they need worship to sort of grow in importance or be gods. And if people don't worship them, then they fall out of heaven or something, fall off of Olympus. And so they're in need. That was this relationship that the Greeks constructed. You have gods who are immortal, but they need humans who worship them. And so there's this, like, give and take between them. We can get things out of the gods because they actually need us. And Paul says, no, God is not in need. Some of the Greek myths talked about gods needing humans as slaves to feed them, that the sacrifices were offering them food. And if you didn't feed them, they died, sort of, but they're immortal. I'm not very good at Greek religion. I'm just trying to make sense out of it. But this God gives everyone life and breath and everything. So it's not about us giving him something that he needs. He has already given us everything. God in himself doesn't need. He is eternal. He ordered this, he made the human race from one to dwell on the earth. So another famous philosopher talked about how humans were originally like these androgynous creatures, and male and female were together as part of the same body, and then the gods sawed them in half, so that we would always need sort of the other half of our body, that we would need the other half, and that's how they described, it was an analogy to describe this union between male and female. But Paul goes right away to Adam and Eve, that God created one couple from which the human race has an origin. And he ordered seasons and ordered the times and made a calendar, that things are ordered. This is fantastically important in a way that we don't appreciate so much, because of how different our conception is. So in most ancient religions, there's a god of disorder. There's this force of chaos, this force of darkness, this force of untamed energy that spills out all over the place. In the ancient world, it often is related to what kind of physical landform? What's chaotic and moves around? Volcanoes? Close. Not quite. You got to be louder. Think of the fan. Be merciful on poor Father Keller's ears. Weather? No, not weather. Something we don't have in North Dakota. A sea. The sea is often the place of disorder, right? Because these giant storms blow up on the sea and they wreck things and they smash into coasts with waves and all sorts of things. You even see that a little bit in the story of Genesis, that the Spirit of God hovers over the waters. It talks about, except God hasn't created water yet, so it's a little strange. But it's this idea that in the background, there's a principle of order and there's a principle of chaos. That something is leading to the disintegration of reality. It's a force. And usually, there's this battle between the good gods and the bad chaos. And so you have all kinds of myths and all kinds of different cultures that talk about slaying chaos, or that the sea is made out of the body of this ancient chaotic god. I think in ancient Babylonian religion it was called Tiamat. It's an ancient Canaanite religion. In ancient Greek religion, there's these forces of chaos. And so when it says God ordered the seasons, that's a counterpoint to that. That the world isn't just disordered. That it's not all this sort of chaotic mess of random chance and coincidences that happen in every direction, and these untamable cosmic energies that are out to destroy things. That no, God created the world and the universe with an order. Now there is a disorder that arises in creation, but where does the disorder come from? Humans, or we could say more broadly, the rejection of God. Like the disorder in creation comes from the rejection of His plan. But His plan was there to be an order and a time and seasons. There's things like gravity, there's constants, they don't change. There's unchanging principles by which the world is governed. And so, like the way that we find a situation, the division of the human race isn't just by chance or accident, but is willed by God. The diversity of cultures, the diversity of people is part of the brilliance of God, that we're not all the same. That we have different cultural expressions, we have different foods that we like, those kinds of things. So, God created humanity as united in one human nature, but with distinct cultures with distinct accidents, that thing between nature and accident, substance and form, or substance and accident, we use today in things like transubstantiation, where something looks the same, the accidents are the same, but the substance has changed. In this case, it's talking about how humans, we all share one nature. And so you can't say, well, this is good for you, but it's not good for me. At least not about the really important things. Sometimes you can say that when it comes to foods and allergies and different things, but that's a reaction in your body, that's a dysfunction. That is, something's not working right. Like your immune system is responding to something like it's a pathogen instead of a friend. And God created, so He ordered all of this reality that we see around us, and He created it so that people might seek Him. That God can be found by seeking Him in the natural world. He put into the heart of man a nature and a law we call the natural law. He put inside of us the desire to do good and avoid evil, for instance. The basic moral impulse at its foundation. God created us with that inside. He created a beautiful and complex natural world so that we would seek Him and that we could find Him in that. He created us as curious creatures. People in the modern world will talk about evolution and how smart animals are, and there's probably some truth that animals do seem to be more intelligent than most people in the ancient world gave them credit for. But no monkey ever invented calculus. It didn't happen. No monkey ever thought, I want to fly to the moon, and so I'm going to build a spaceship to get there. But humans did. God made us curious. We don't just like the natural world as it is. We want to know how it works. We want to know how to manipulate it and change it. We have these desires inside of us, and they're given to us by God. This is something that we would say even now, that you can arrive at the conclusion that there is a God without revelation. It's something that makes logical sense, that everything has a beginning. But the process of arriving at the reality that there is one God and He is the creator of everything is difficult and fraught with error. And so we're given revelation, we're given scripture, we're given, like God comes to us to teach us about worshiping Him. He gives us a shortcut to the process. But finding Him is hard. This God is not far from any of us. He's not just like these Greek gods that are in heaven that don't care. Because that's the other thing. In the ancient world, people had these long prayers. They would say these prayers and use all of these different titles of gods to try and get their attention. Do you remember the story of Elijah and the prophets of Baal? And they start and they're praying on Mount Carmel, and Elijah taunts them, like, maybe your God is sleeping, you should talk louder. Maybe he's on vacation. But it's because in the ancient world, if the gods are already immortal, they don't really care about you, and so you have to try to get their attention. You have to show your devotion or do something extraordinary. In Christianity, the God that Paul is preaching about, God actually cares about us. He's not distant from His creatures. In Him we live and move and have our being. We're related to Him on the level of ontology, on the way that we are. In our very existence, we depend on Him. We are His offspring. Now, in ancient Greece, humanity comes from the sexual union of gods, and sort of something that breaks or falls apart, or they get mad and send people without immortality and all kinds of other things. But it's from these gods that are behaving sort of like teenagers in an unruly high school. In Christianity, the God that Paul is proclaiming, we are related to God as His children, not because of something physical, not because He gave us physical reality from Himself, like through procreation, but because He created us in His image and in His likeness. Divinity is not fashioned out of gold or silver by human hands or arts. We don't make things divine. We don't make things that then are God's to bow down and worship. God made us, and so our worship is a response to our creation, not we worship the things that we create. And now this God who created us, who ordered all things, who has done all this, is inviting us to repentance, to turn toward Him through the message of the gospel, where in times past He has allowed you to walk in error. Paul is making this argument that before Jesus, people don't have the same responsibility to follow and worship God that they do after they encounter the message of the gospel, because they didn't know any better. There wasn't any truth out there that made sense of human experience, that really worked for us. The day is coming, the day is coming when God will judge the world in justice. So he talked about creation, he talks about humanity, and then he talks about the end of the world, the judgment. Where do you hear prophecies of the Old Testament? He hasn't talked about Jesus as the son of David. He hasn't talked about Jesus as the Messiah of Israel. Right? You see how this is a different argument. He's not arguing from the Old Testament scriptures. He's arguing in this case from the natural world, from our creation, from humanity, from our desire for eternity. Like he's building a different kind of case for Christianity. And that's not a bad thing. In fact, it's a good thing. He's trying to address himself to his hearers. And then, so the day is coming when God will judge the world with justice. He will judge all of us. And he provided confirmation of this by raising Jesus from the dead. And the Greeks are like, oh, wait a minute. Why would this be such a problem for them? Paul's argument is like, Jesus rising from the dead is the linchpin of this entire thing. You got to have that. These promises are true. What I'm telling you is true because this guy was dead and rose again. But why would that be such a problem for the ancient Greeks?
Did they not believe in the afterlife?
They believed in the afterlife, but that's a good thought. You're moving in the right direction. It's something about the afterlife that they believed in. Remember our Platonists? Body bad, soul good. Well, if your body is bad, what does the resurrection of the dead mean? You got your body back, right? Well, if your body is bad and the goal of life is to be removed from your body so that your soul can finally be free, the resurrection from the dead, like, blows up everything. Like, that's worthless. Why would